Welcome to LawNext PR, the podcast where we put a spotlight on the latest news coming out of the legal tech industry. This is Bob Ambrogi, and in each sponsored episode of LawNext PR, I interview a legal tech company about its latest news and developments. Today, we're talking with the company UniCourt about its launch of new legal analytics featuring judgment and attorney comparison analytics. Joining me to discuss the news is Josh Blandi, the CEO and co-founder of UniCourt. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again, Bob. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you. Let's kind of cut right to the chase, and let me start by asking you, what is it that you've announced this week?
Well, we've been leading up to a culmination of three kind of key features that we're have incorporated into our new product, DART, which is our in-facing application. It stands for Docket Research, Analytics, and Tracking. And the three core features are the ability to search for judgments for similar cases similar to yours to see the outcomes of them. The ability to look at judgment analytics, so you could compare, for example, personal injury case types in certain jurisdictions to see what are the judgments awarded for that, what's the average, what's the timing, and then also you can compare attorneys and their outcomes. So we could now begin to compare attorneys for the cases that have had judgments or verdicts happen, what percentage of their cases go to trial, for example, and from those, how many do they win, what is total damages, in an effort to be able to compare different attorneys or assess doing some opposition research on who you're up against.
Yeah. So in all of these, as you say, build on DART, which you launched about 6 months ago, I think, roughly, a little more than that, maybe. Earlier, midway through 2025, anyway.
Yeah, around ILTA time last year.
At ILTA time last year, yeah. Why don't we start with? Where do you want to start? You want to start with the search for judgments and talk a little bit more about that?
I think that's a good place. It's always been UniCourt's goal to amass all of the docket data in the United States. And I think we've largely are achieving that goal. I think we have now the largest docket data set, comprising at this point over 2 billion dockets and documents. And now we've built a whole entire AI pipeline to begin to extract out valuable information in those documents themselves. And one of the pieces we always get asked is, hey, outcomes on cases, when money begins to change hands, right? That's an important point to measure. And so one of the recent product we're releasing is the ability to do research on cases with looking at outcomes. So the greatest example of that is I have this case, it has, these claims, there's fact patterns or these types of injuries, and I'm looking for similar cases in a certain jurisdiction or state, for example, that had outcomes to them. So you can actually begin to value cases if you're on the plaintiff side, or assess your risk if you're on the defense side on, hey, what's your max exposure liability? This is, one of the major initiatives we have in terms of outcomes, and also looking at kind of initial pleadings and cases, so we can kind of tie the two together.
So how does that? What kinds of judgment information am I able to search for? Are these just where there has been a judicial order? Is this jury awards? Is this settlements? What's kind of included in the scope of what I can look at here?
So for our recent release, we're actually have extracted all the different types of judgment. These could be default judgments, verdicts, judgment on the verdict, bench trial judgments, declaratory judgments. We're going to be expanding specifically the jury verdicts and judgment on the verdicts to other states. This release is for the state of New York, and we'll be moving. We're currently working on 3 or 4 other major states that we'll be releasing here, probably end of Q2 of this year. So the idea is that as we've ran this kind of data pipeline through this information, and now we're kind of fine tuning it for different jurisdictions. So more states to follow.
So can you kind of walk me through a little bit how I go about actually doing the search? I mean, I've got a client has come to me, they've got a particular set of injuries. I'm trying to determine what's the likely recovery, say, that I might be able to obtain on behalf of this client. how do I how do I do that search? How do I conduct it?
Yeah, so there's two primary ways you kind of conduct your research. The first way I would start with is just a natural language AI driven search, which would be something like, show me personal injury cases that involve, say, a traumatic brain injury that received a judgment, say, greater than 5 million or $3 million or whatever kind of you're looking to whatever that kind of top point you're or it becomes pretty dangerous, right? Typically,
Mhm.
2 to 3 million is at that point. Anything over five would be kind of considered like a nuclear verdict. But anything over $5 million that was filed in the last 5 years in this jurisdiction, and literally you just type your question in, and it's going to serve you up cases that fit that criteria. What's really cool about how we've designed the search is you can quickly change that from a natural language search. If you want to quickly add a bunch of filters to that, you could move it to a filtered search, which basically takes your query and converts it to filters. So if you wanted to put like, case types or jurisdictions or time periods or other parameters in that search, you could easily do that without having to redo your search again.
So start natural language, then add in filters to refine as needed.
Yes, correct.
Sounds good. Um, let's talk a little bit about the judgment analytics that you've launched also just within the last week as we're leading up to Legal Week in New York here, which is kind of announcement season. Uh, tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is now looking at the rather than one-off cases similar to yours. This is now looking at the aggregate level. So, for example, if I said, "Hey, I want to look at all the cases in New York that are personal injury in nature, for example, what percentage of those have verdicts associated with them? You could look at what is the total judgments, what are ones that went to verdict. You could also look at the judgment win percentage, plaintiff versus defendant for judgments versus verdict. So, for example, some of the findings we have is that, not surprisingly, plaintiffs win slightly more on judgments, and they win significantly more on verdicts. I think it was like 57 to 62% of the time. So just that alone, knowing, hey, if you're going to take this to a jury trial, right, it becomes typically a riskier proposition. You also get things like, hey, what is the medium judgment awarded? You get how many have been awarded? Uh, what is the timing to take it to, for example, a judgment versus verdict, or to different kind of milestones in the case? And this timing can be a medium, an average, longest, and shortest. And then the kind of other piece to that is the attorney um, comparison analytics, where I could now take a panel group of attorneys, if I'm corporate or if I'm doing opposition research, I could actually look at a specific attorney, or we could look at specific attorneys in a firm. If you want to use it for BD to highlight, some of your numbers, you can now use it to compare attorneys against other attorneys on a wide variety of metrics, everything from things like their case count to the number of judgments awarded, the amount awarded, their percentage of judgments, percentage of cases that go to judgment, to the number of verdicts, percentage of cases that go to verdict, their win percentage if they're a plaintiff versus defense, and a whole, I've probably named about 5 or 6 of the 10 or 15 different metrics you can gauge them by.
Yeah. On the judgment analytics, how granular do you get? Actually, I guess on the attorney analytics too, but I mean, is this by court? Is this by particular judge? I mean, what's the level of degree that you're able to get analytics on?
Yeah, right now you can filter by time period, types of cases, courts, judgment types. We will be, since we've kind of built this all off of what we call our litigation knowledge graph, meaning uniquely identifying the players involved in litigation. So those would be your judges, attorneys, law firms, parties, right? And
Yeah.
then creating these intersections. Yeah, one of the intersections we will be creating at some point here is the intersection of the judge. So you could actually put a judge intersection in there if you wanted to look to see how that changed things.
Yeah. Can I do kind of comparisons between judges or among judges to find out? I mean, I guess, I don't know. I don't know the law. I don't know the rules in New York. I don't know how easy it is to kind of pick a particular court or a particular judge. But if I had that ability, would I be able to kind of compare? This one is more likely to go plaintiff. This one takes longer on deciding motions or something.
Yeah, this would be specific to attorneys, eventually law firms. So you'll be able to compare the outcomes of firms themselves
Yeah.
with intersections with judges later on this year. But yeah, we're not producing like yet the well, I call it the motion analytics, where judges
Right.
become a much more significant factor, right? The real
Right.
value on the case outcomes or judgments are really putting a dollar, like a dollar
Hmm.
amount on what that case is either
Yeah.
worth or what the risk
Valuing your
is with that
case.
case, right? Versus say, call it the motion where the judge would have obviously a much greater influence on those rulings versus when things go to trial, particularly jury trials, that becomes a lot more out of the hands of the judge itself.
Right. So that valuing the case helps you evaluate, you as the lawyer evaluate maybe even whether to take the case in the first place, how hard to push settlement, what to push for in settlement, um, you know,
Or
those kinds of factors, right?
yeah, or even just advising your client, risk, right?
Right.
Hey, this is kind of like what our exposure potentially could look like, um, if the facts of this case aren't great.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so both plaintiff and defendant, there's a use case there.
Yes, correct. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. If
Um,
you're a plaintiff tort firm, you're going to be like looking at this, saying, "Show me some other cases that had these outcomes," and that might uh, completely change what you think of about settling or not. Right? So you might see it
mhm.
like, hey, we have an outside opportunity to actually get much greater amounts for. And vice versa, if you're a corporation, say like an insurance company, taking a look at this saying, you know what, we don't see as much exposure as we thought, so we're gonna push this for trial, or we have outside exposure here, maybe we're willing to settle it for more.
Yeah. And then on the attorney comparison side of it, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about some of the different ways that can be used. I think you mentioned business development in describing it, but what do you see as some of the key uses for that?
I would say there we see two primary uses. One is if you're a corporation, you have a list of panel firms and attorneys. You could kind of see how they stack up and who might be the best fit based on their track record. Would be one use. The other would be kind of like if you're a law firm, kind of the BD use case, highlighting kind of your numbers versus maybe other firms or attorneys they might use for these types of cases, right? To say, hey, we actually have, a better win percentage, or we tried more cases in this jurisdiction for these types of cases, and we have more experience, right? And
Yeah.
then the last would just be, opposition research, which is, this attorney, what am I up against in this firm, right? What is their
Hmm.
track record?
Yeah. Uh, uh, I, I'm curious in just your own playing around with this, testing this, building this. Have you kind of come across any interesting trends in the courts, or seen any data that reveal any interesting patterns out of the courts?
We're going to start producing some very soon on kind of litigation trends when it comes to the outcomes. But yeah, in general, we've seen that the trending towards the amount of judgments, or the judgment amounts, has been trending upward for quite some time. And in this analysis, we went back for our initial set. We went back and we did this on, I think it was about, I want to say about 7 million cases that we extracted judgments out of. 7 million. There was a total of 227 judgments that we extracted out. So it kind of gives you the idea of the scale of the pipeline we'd be able to do this. But yeah, I think now we can begin to see all kinds of trends on where judgment amounts are trending. Uh, what really excites us the most is now when you begin to overlap those trends with very, fact specific, claim specific allegations in the beginning, right? Your ideal
Yeah.
situation would be, hey, you have this matter and this is the information we know about it, or we're on the defense side and we have this claim that's been filed, and here's what they're alleging. Now show me similar cases that fit this criteria, so you can kind of better guide on, you know, is this trending in the wrong direction? What is my exposure? Right. Looking at other cases and how they've handled them in terms of, leading up to the outcome itself.
Yeah. I know there's been a rise over the last couple of years in litigation funding companies. Do you see this as of use to those kinds of organizations?
I see it for use for litigation funding and actually for the defense side, because now they both have some good data back visibility on case valuations, right?
Right.
So I think at the end of the day, when you can say, hey, here are 4 precedent cases that support our claim, and you can come back and say, well, they were lacking these things, right? You now have something to really negotiate.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you're getting this going with New York and building it out into other states. What's the timeline for expanding it out?
Yeah, we plan to release it in California and Florida and Delaware, and potentially one other state by the end of Q2. And we've
Right.
already been working on some of these states, and so we're feeling pretty good about those timelines.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. If I'm already a UniCourt customer and I want to include this in what I have, how do I do that?
it's really simple. We can just turn it on. So you always see
Okay.
it populated in it.
Yeah.
If you don't have access, so there's a easy way to request it, so that can be turned on.
Yeah. And is this primarily for your enterprise customers? I know you have different tiers of customers.
Yeah, these would be for our enterprise customers.
Yeah. Any other future plans in terms of building this out, adding additional analytics?
Yeah, the whole agency, the agentic AI, now is very interesting. Essentially what UniCourt is building is this very uh, interconnected knowledge graph. So we're creating a litigation skeleton, if you will, right?
Hmm.
And when we begin to, we've done some initial testing on our agents. So now you could ask all kinds of questions to your agent, show me these cases, what were the outcomes, potentially like where are areas that, my case lacks, or is strong, right? I think what are seeing now is this big transformation on not being bound anymore in terms of the questions you can ask over this data set. And so we spent a lot of time building out these connections now that we can release these agents on it. So we're very optimistic that really some of the most difficult questions you could possibly ask, say 3 or 5 years ago, are completely possible.
Yeah. And to what extent is our LLMs or AI enabling all of this that you're building?
I mean, it's a huge piece of it. Almost every layer in our data pipeline is using um, AI or LLMs, small language models, large language models, everything in between, depending on the cost, right? And it, it's I would say there's probably 5 or 6 different layers that we're using this. And the other thing that's kind of neat about the pipeline we've built is as we begin to release agents and other things over it, we can optimize now stuff for a cost, meaning I can use a small language model to make this much more accurate, right? But I can use a large language model to get down to if I have an initial smaller data set, I can run it over, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
as we begin to pick up patterns of the types of questions that people are asking, want answers to, we could optimize that very fast within months.
Yeah. Uh, Anything else that you'd like people listening to this today to know about this new release?
Yeah, if you're interested in getting access, you can go to unicourt.com and uh, give us a submission. And as always, Bob, I love talking with you, and thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing it, Josh. Always good to see you. Well, I'll see you in a week or so, probably at Legal Week in New York. And you guys are going to be exhibiting there?
Yes, we will. We'll be exhibiting at
All
Legal
right.
Week. Yes, I look forward. Maybe catch up for a beer or something.
Yeah, and for people listening who want to have a chance to maybe learn more about this, go check them out at Legal Week. All right, well, Josh, thanks a lot. And thanks to everybody out there for listening or watching today's episode. That does it for today. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or find us on YouTube also at LawNext _PR. This is Bob Ambrogi. Thanks for joining us today.